Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Spiritually Speaking. I am Dee, and I have another amazing guest with us today. This is Michael, and we are going to talk about astrology. How are you doing today, Michael?
Good. Thank you, Dee.
You're very welcome.
Good. How are you?
I'm very well. Thank you for
Good.
asking.
Good. You're welcome.
I'm very excited about our conversation today. This is one of the areas that I don't know a whole lot about, but I'm super fascinated by. So I'm extremely excited about where this conversation is going to take us today. We had a great pre-chat, and there was a lot of aspects of this that we talked about. What is your favorite thing about what you do?
Oh, just that astrology proves that we live in a conscious universe.
Yeah,
That's the favorite thing.
yeah. And so
That
for
we live in a
people who,
conscious, yeah, that we live in a conscious universe is, among the more important realities of awareness of our time throughout history, but especially with materialistic science having such authority. And it kind of at its core, in its orthodox core, it represents a posture of random chance that existence is based on that, and astrology works and proves that that's not true. So I'm sure it's not the only metaphysical science that does that, but it certainly is a powerful one.
yes, I agree with you. So for people who don't understand or maybe haven't heard the term conscious universe before, could you explain that a little?
It means that existence itself is conscious and is multidimensional, and the outer manifest universe comes from within the inner planes of consciousness, which goes back to what would generally be called source.
Mhm.
One could say God, if you like, but source is a more general kind of non-charged term because people have a lot of ideas what God is or means, etc. So source just is that. And with the rise again of modern science, the notion has become that consciousness is the brain functioning,
Hmm.
but consciousness, the universe being conscious is like the internet. It doesn't require your laptop. So the laptop's like a brain, and when you turn it on with electricity, it has a kind of consciousness and it computes, right? Just like our brain. And but our mind is not our brain. Our mind is beyond the brain. The brain is the processing unit. The mind is that which is accessing. And so you get into this idea of consciousness as mind, which translates in a way to spirit or spirit mind. And you begin to realize that by the very design of existence, there's clearly laws behind how existence is. So once you get into laws, whether it's the laws of physics or metaphysics and spirituality or any scientific or spiritual or metaphysical law, well, you bump into the idea that law must be from a source that's intelligent.
Hmm. Yeah.
That's all. So, yeah. So, consciousness is, we live in consciousness. We don't just simply have it because, and that's where, language, like the English language, is limited. So, it kind of refers to the person as conscious or unconscious, which is fair enough, but it bumps into the deeper philosophical perspective of consciousness. So it becomes a very day to day, sort of almost rudimentary perspective, valid enough to use. But again, English language is somewhat known to be limited in its scope of meaning, where other languages have a wider, believe it or not, spectrum of vocabulary to explain terms and words. So English is a easier language to learn than others, generally speaking, but it has its limitations.
Hmm. Oh, I agree with you so much. And I'm sure you know who Greg Braden is, and he speaks to this exact thing, how the English language is so very limited and kind of skews the
Mm.
meaning of certain things as we say them. And he speaks
Mhm.
about the Hopi language a lot and how differently they speak, and it brings so much more depth to the meaning of some of the things that are discussed. And it's, to me, it's so beautiful.
Good example, yes. Good
Yeah.
example.
So, how do you feel, kind of sticking to the consciousness thing, how do you feel astrology relates to us individually in our individual consciousness?
Well, you see, astrology is a metaphysical science based on this multidimensional universe principle. And by the way, we are also multidimensional. We're made in the image of it. That's what they mean. In the image of God means we're multidimensional beings, souls incarnate. And in that deeper inner layer is the blueprint of existence. That's where the design is. Just like there's a blueprint for the laptop, once again, or the cell phone, any computer clearly has a blueprint of design and a type of what you could basically call technology, layers of technology behind it. So that's true of the manifest universe as well. And so archetypal language begins to open the door to understanding that there's these core building blocks. Okay. And people kind of generally refer to as archetypes as kind of character like king or prince or slave or prostitute or judge or whatever, right? These
Hmm.
these personality types.
Right.
That's what's called a very exoteric understanding of archetypes. It's valid to say that, but archetypes are actually shapes that come from sound. Sound is the like that's known generally in the deeper reaches as sounding light. And studies in science, even what's called cymatics, 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 reveals how sound creates shape. And shape has a meaning, a psychology. Like there's a difference between a circle and a square
Hmm.
and a triangle. They're kind of different creatures, and you can go into that. So those are foundational to archetypal understanding. So the blueprint, the archetypal principles that are the behind the very design of existence, okay, of which we are a part. Like even when we look at creatures of all kinds, they sort of have often eyes and ears and a mouth, there's sort
Hmm.
of right down to the insects, etc. And even at a cellular level, really, there's a consumption, elimination, ingestion, digestion process at play. So, yeah, all of that is what I generally refer to as the parallels. There's parallel, okay, people talk about parallel universes,
Hmm.
which is a way of referring to other dimensions, by the way. But when I talk about parallels, I'm talking about what probably can be best understood through fractal science. Like if you study holism, holism is the principle of that there's core principles that iterate. Iterate means they grow up from each other and they become increasingly more complex, but there's a point at which they repeat. If somebody wanted to understand that better, they would go online and look up fractals. Okay, fractals and holism, and all of these words are somewhat technical, I appreciate, but they're part of what would be called holism. Holism is sort of a term that's that much more or closer to what's called spiritual science. Metaphysics, holism are terms linked to what's called spiritual science. And when you get into the nitty gritty of it, you end up very quickly looking at fractals. So all of that archetypal um, reality is the very fabric of our embodiment.
Hmm.
Okay. Without it, it's just based once again on the design and the intelligence of purpose. This is the key word. It's not just that it is on purpose.
Mhm.
So that weaves into our existence as individuals on a personal level with consciousness, living also in consciousness.
That's some deep stuff. So the word fractals makes me think of something that I've seen here quite a bit recently online with other people that are in the spiritual community posting about it. Um, is soul fractals and how we should call our soul fractals back to ourselves. Is that something you've heard of? And what is your take on that?
When you get into the science of the soul, you realize that there's sort of like the soul exists both in non-duality, where there is no notion of fractal, no notion of mind. Non-duality is spirit. And it also transcends energy. People often say it's all energy. That's true of the manifest universe, but it would be kind of wrong to refer to the non-dualistic realms as energy. They're spirit, which is kind of a different principle, okay, in terms of the specific meaning of the word. But then, as with the principle of sound, sound creates energy, vibration, frequency.
Hmm.
Okay, sound, energy, vibration, frequency. Then that's called the realm of mind. So the mind of the soul, which can be understood as the deep subconscious mind,
Hmm.
okay, and reach the deep subconscious mind, yours and mine and everybody's, there's a very individual root, but then it kind of goes into the next level where it's like a droplet. Your mind, my mind is like a droplet in the ocean.
Hmm.
So it's a bit paradoxical here, but yeah, the droplet out of the ocean has a kind of a relative individuality, but it exists also simultaneously in the ocean. So it's the soul, what like more accurately what they're talking about is the mind of the soul that gets fragmented. Fragmented is, say, basically the word, and the idea of retrieving the soul parts is a valid thing, a valid thing. It's a little bit shamanic. It kind of starts going into this notion of magic that if we can get the soul parts back, we'll be just totally together.
Yeah.
Not that simple. It's a kind of wishful thinking. It's because there's karma and destiny. So it can definitely be of value and I believe help people and perhaps increase their constitution, make them think more clearly. So I don't want to dismiss it. No, it's just that it has great value in a shamanic spirituality, but it hits a ceiling of limitation at worst, in as much as there's a karma and a soul plan for this life, what we call destiny, or what's called in Eastern Sanskrit, karma dharma. It's a nice rhyming, alliteration of sorts. They sit beside each other very closely, like yin and yang.
Hmm.
To say karma dharma is like saying right and left, and male and female, and yin and yang. So basically, the that principle steps in and says, well, okay, good. You can definitely do those things and strengthen yourselves and see, retrieving parts is a kind of way of looking at it. It's kind of interesting. You wonder where are they gone, but it's
Right.
more a question of the person being fragmented, non-integrated. So there's unintegrated parts. Okay, and then that is a different kind of conversation. No longer are we kind of after the magic of getting them. That's one thing. That's like going to that's like a little bit of like putting all the parts of the house. Okay, we're gonna build a house, and we've now gathered all the material, and there it is. It's a much different thing to build that house.
Right.
Building the house is the process of integration, which cannot happen quickly, and hoping and wishing that it will happen quickly is kind of sort of childish a little bit. Like, of course, we would like it to, but it's contrary to the evolutionary process. It's like saying, it's like spoiling the child. Here you go. There, you don't have to gather the materials and you don't have to build the house. We're just going to give it to you.
Right.
Okay. Like it's contrary to the meaning of life, which in my view, according to astrology, by the way, in my interpretation, is that life is about learning to be a responsible, able co-creator.
Yes.
We're here to do.
Yes.
Okay, so not just be given and, oh, God save us, or take us away from this terrible place, or, this, it kind of becomes a weakness and it misses the point. The notion of a savior consciousness misses the point of the integration process, by the way, which in deep psychology is called also, it includes, there's many aspects to integration, which basically includes integrity, like being responsible, showing up, um, making efforts, working cooperatively, all those things.
Mm-hmm.
The other side, it kind of flips back to the fragmentation, is what's called shadow work.
Mm-hmm.
Shadow work means it's not shadow in the sense of darkness, evil.
Right.
It means what's hidden,
Right.
and what's not clear to you, which can also be called blind spots.
Mm-hmm.
Like, people will say, I know who I am. I'm kind of wink at them. I go, oh, I bet you don't. Not unless, not unless you've worked very hard. And even then, you're going to come to a point where you're going to have to be very, very, very self-honest.
Mm-hmm.
And then that's what's called personal truth. People are after truth. I say to them, well, that's valid, but self-honesty is the greatest truth,
Mm-hmm.
because your notion of truth and my notion of truth is kind of subjective.
Yes.
Okay, so this person has this truth and that truth and the other interpretation of truth. But self-honesty, that's power, because what you do is you develop the integrity and what's called the character strength of owning whatever your story is.
Yeah.
That's the beginning of power. That's the beginning of power. So you see how it all dovetails what I just said with soul parts.
Yes.
Okay, it's a valid thing, and it's the step in the right direction to think that way, but it includes other, concentric circles around it of reality that kind of place you back in to integrally showing up,
Mm-hmm.
delivering cooperatively and cooperation, by the way, implies with yourself and others and the reality of the situation. So,
Right. That was really
excuse me.
cool. I really enjoyed listening to that. So it's a different terminology than I've heard used before. The integration sounds a lot like what most people in the spiritual groups refer to as inner work. Would you agree that that's the same thing?
Yes, yes. Inner work is the awareness that the outer work has an inner activation. So, inner work, the notion of inner work is really good, but your inner work is proven in the field of life.
Yeah.
There's no all day long doing inner work and you're kind of meditating and reading. That's not going to be inner work. Like, in other words, all work must be tested. Okay. So it becomes a little bit, again, of a notion. So while I don't disagree, yes, it is inner work. It's just again, to be more thorough, inner work requires outer action outer engagement, outer performance. See, there's this Eastern notion of like enlightenment, which I think was a cult consciousness way back when, and
Mhm.
still is there, that you kind of, excuse me, could sit under the Bodhi tree and kind of get enlightened and then transcend this mortal coil. That's a grand delusion. Okay. So while I'm not saying enlightenment itself is a grand delusion, forcing enlightenment without integration in the playing field of life is kind of like saying to existence or source, okay, yeah, nice try with all of these props that you created, this whole, existence thing.
Mhm.
I'm kind of not too interested in this existence thing. I just, gonna sit here, I'm gonna get enlightened, and I'm gonna transcend this nonsense. Okay,
Right.
that is probably as great an insult as you could give to source right there. It's kind of like, don't you, in other words, I have a phrase that kind of describes it quite simply and I think nicely. It says, if you want to love the creator, love the creation. And if you
Yeah.
want to be like the creator, you want to be like the creator, create.
Yeah. That's so cool. It kind of reminds me of something I actually said to someone yesterday who has really a lot of gifts as far as intuition and things like that, and is actively and consciously choosing not to embrace that gift and share it as fully as they could be able to, or could choose to rather. Um, would you say that's kind of the same thing? Like I kind of I gave him the I didn't quote a scripture, but and I know there is a scripture in the Bible, something about burying your gifts and not sharing them with the world. So would you think that that's kind of on the same level, just different phraseology?
Similar. It depends a little bit on the rationale why. It could be everything from fear, self-doubt, a lack of will. It could be a belief that that's ego. It goes on and
Yeah.
on. It could be a genuine, it could be a destiny lesson about being more humble. Or it could be many things that's causing the person not to do it yet.
Mm.
But we are timeless, eternal beings, and there is no real escape.
Right.
All notions of escape or delay are invariably temporary. In time, if our deeper subconscious mind, our soul mind, decides that it's kind of had enough of our games, it will definitely see the embodied vehicle of the soul has only relative importance. So the soul takes on incarnation after incarnation. The mind transmigrates to the next. And admittedly, when we reincarnate, we take on a new personality body, a new social conditioning environment, okay, a different time. But all evasions and escapisms and denials and whatever they may be will be rectified because it's kind of like saying the universe is saying we will leave no one behind.
Hmm.
No one will be left behind. It's not kind of if you decide this but in this ego body, this life, yes, a person could just completely sit on the curb all their life.
Hmm.
But if they're doing that willfully and ignoring the impulse of their spirit, they're going to develop negative karma.
Mm.
And basically speaking in duality, I must admit, not that existence is malicious or vengeful, but negative karma produces pain.
Hmm.
It's as simple as that. Pain. Pain will happen. It's just the way duality works, pleasure and pain.
Hmm.
So if you are integral, responsible, etc., you generally are creating more pleasure. And of course, a very integrated person is basically finds the sweet spot.
Hmm.
They're not all about pleasure. They're not all about pain. They have merged the two. So they're not like a child at the amusement park full of glee and pleasure, but neither are they in a, self-recriminating or flagellating kind of pain,
Hmm.
like a hellish place to be. Pain's a hellish state.
Yeah, it is. I've been there plenty of times. It's very
Sure,
painful.
we
It's
all
not
have.
fun.
No, it's no fun. But as the saying goes, pain is a very effective teacher.
Oh, yes, very much so.
It goes, don't do that. Don't go there. Change what you're doing. Do something. And of course, that's just the way it is. So it's a fairly simple equation, pleasure and pain.
Yeah. So,
Duality is that's how duality works.
yeah. So, how would you encourage people or recommend to people to further integrate themselves and start putting those rooms together in their house, so to speak?
Well, it begins with a sincere desire to be aware. Okay, to the sincerity to be aware
Hmm.
is the beginning of the journey to being aware is a process
Hmm.
of becoming more, you could say, kind of like enlightened or informed or educated or whatever you want to, okay, aware, which, though at a very personal level, gets into what would be called personal truth, but more specifically, which translates, as mentioned, to self-honesty.
Mm.
Honesty. So the beautiful thing is that when you are sincerely determined to be aware at whatever level you're operating, it's not like there's a sense of it should be this or that strictly.
Right.
It's kind of, it's a little bit like we should mind our own business. If that person is going about their life very slow and in whatever fashion they are, but they're actually at peace and happy,
Hmm.
we, are wise to let them be and not to project notions of what life should be, how life should be lived.
Hmm.
They could be, for various reasons, living a very, very simple, very unaccomplished life, even, but that's okay. If
Right.
they're, if they're, see, what I could say happy, but it's more accurate to say if they're in alignment with their personal truth,
Hmm.
which is you get into this personal truth thing, which your karma and dharma is connected to. And then of course, if they're in alignment with their personal truth, they'll be at peace and happy. You begin to understand when you study astrology that the reason the world is so diverse in terms of levels of success and strength and power and all the things that come with those things,
Hmm.
it's because it's a school for souls and all notions that we're going to make it good for everybody and practically force them to is it's a kind of an ego projection. It's kind of like what communism wants to do.
Hmm.
Make the playing, it kind of wants to make the playing field level. But if you look at the world, the playing field is not level.
Hmm.
And some people are born with greater strengths. And it's very evident, right? From
Yes.
the earliest age, right? So while we're all ultimately at a deep, deep soul level created equal, we're not all born equal. It becomes, the point is that we need a society that allows for people to more fully be in their truth and with recognition that truth is not, or even success is not symbolized in very narrow ways.
Right. I agree with that.
It's
It
much
looks
wide,
different for
yes.
everyone. Yeah.
Yes, it's very wide, and so the complexity of society, if the society is really a good society, it allows almost for, or it recognizes that there's going to be lower echelons of society and every level up.
Hmm.
And it also is not a given that those at the top are good and those at the bottom are bad. Those
Right.
at the bottom could be those at the bottom, in whatever way that means, could be quite good,
Hmm.
and vice versa.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I totally agree with that. So, why do you feel like it's such a struggle for people to recognize and embrace their personal truths? Because I know I've been on a discovery journey, especially in the last year. It's been like just one thing right after another. It's been really insane and overwhelming sometimes because all of this stuff is just like tumbling over itself as far as my own personal growth goes. And even just this morning, I was sitting there journaling and I had this epiphany about myself and I was like, oh, holy shit, that's a thing with me right now and I've got to address that. And but I know being aware of it is the first step to addressing the issue. So why do you feel like people struggle so much with the personal truth thing?
Well, it's largely because they are either not aware or they're locked into beliefs and self-concepts. Yeah. Um, there's a lot of factors. It's not an easy thing, but I don't, in the school of life, there's many levels and grades, and we can't expect, or we can, but it's inaccurate to assume or and expect that people will. But there's a lot of forces at play, from monopoly forces to belief-driven forces.
Mhm.
It's a game, it's a game. There's a lot of players and a lot of people want to win. And if winning comes at the expense of others,
Mhm.
they'll do it. That's called instinct-driven ego. The instinct wants to survive, and if a strong offense is a strong defense, they can become very aggressive and they live purely by instincts, which is quite a different state of being than living by intuitions.
Mhm.
People often put instincts and intuitions together, and it's kind of I hear it a lot on television, that or just movies, because I don't really watch television very often.
Yeah.
But the point is that instincts are as different as to intuitions as the liver is from the heart.
Yeah.
They're very different creatures. Okay. Yeah. So yeah, there's a lot of factors, and it's kind of you could describe it on one hand as the human condition, like humanity's at this place. And positively, we're at a more aware, educated place than we ever have been in at least a very, very long time.
Mhm.
That statement kind of indirectly lends to the possibility that there were higher civilizations on the planet before, which I generally give credence to. I give
Yes.
some merit because, pyramids and high technology, and there's all the evidence. And
Yes.
I don't really personally believe it was just aliens. I believe it was us. We were very well, we were at a higher level in way back. And that's why in popular religion, they refer to, most people have heard the phrase, the fall. We fell
Mhm.
collectively, the human condition. And it looks like the human condition is steadily on the rise. But it wasn't that long ago that, for example, we were fighting in the Civil War in the United States, for example. And
Mhm.
I'll just say we generally,
Right.
with bayonets and single shot rifle, like etc. was not that long ago. So we're relatively new in this modern era of technology, right? And the
Mhm.
human condition, what's happening, of course, is we have suddenly an immense access to immense power, nuclear power, both in the power plant sense, but of course in the bomb sense too. And I say that because it's almost like the biggest concern we have, practically even more than the environment, is the nuclear. But what's happening, of course, is countries with their tradition of and pride of culture, you know, want to instinctually survive.
Hmm.
So what I'm getting at with all of this is that so there's a lot of games being played on the planet, and this what the that's what life on the planet is about, by the way. Just to say briefly, okay, while uh, our destiny is to learn to be responsible, able co-creators, another way of describing it is life is all about power. Power is not control.
Right.
Power is health, a healthy body, and food, clothing, and shelter is actually power. So when we say the word power, it's what I mean, and it's not power over, but the instinct of power is control, and that tends to be the power over.
Right.
So in the game board of life, woven with the human condition, there's a lot of games being played which are invariably control oriented in many ways.
Hmm.
Many ways. Religion does it, science does it. Of course, it's true in the corporate arena and any arena. Husbands and wives do it.
Yeah.
The dog and you and your pet do it. Like yeah. So it's kind of inescapable that we're dealing with power and control, and it starts to go into creative cooperation. So part of our co-creative destiny is, that's why I keep using the word cooperation.
Yes.
We learn to cooperate more, control less, and a truly powerful person in a very balanced place is an empowering. They empower people.
Right.
They yes, by a smile, by a gesture, by kindness,
Hmm.
by more organized measures.
Yes.
They then you get all kinds of heroic types who kind of there's a big you can be, have, and do anything you want march out there. You can, it's a kind of materialism. You can be and have and do anything you want. Astrology says no, you can't. You have you have your nature and destiny, and what you're doing by thinking that is you're kind of following a belief system, and
Hmm.
you're getting lost in what you want versus who you are.
Yes. That's very
And
true.
people will say, I know who I am. I'm like, do you really know what's your deep takeaway? Because you can't take any of those goodies back with you. So
Yes.
we've gotten lost in the means and lost sight of the end, which is to evolve as a soul, which is not the same, by the way, as Darwinian species evolution.
Hmm.
We're talking about personal soul growth evolution. And
Right.
that's where you get back to the life on the planet as a school. So yeah, there's a whole philosophy there, all of which, by the way, can be understood as observed in astrology. Just to be clear, that's all shows up in, like, if when you study the 12 sign zodiac, it's a philosophy. The philosophy of the 12 sign zodiac, by the way, I just want to clarify this for you and your listeners, is based on the shape of a circle funded, or a division of a shape, which, for example, a circle has a horizontal and a vertical line, and that creates four quarters.
Hmm.
And the four quarters symbolize earth, air, fire, and water, north, south, east, and west,
Hmm.
the four seasons, and it goes on like that.
Right.
So what a lot of people, there's a lot of astrology's on the rise, and there's a lot of confusion. People are talking about the real sky. Like, that's called an exoteric perspective. The astrology is fundamentally anchored in sacred geometry.
Hmm.
It's not about the constellations, actually. It's like Mayan astrology exists, it doesn't defer to the constellations. And Chinese astrology exists and it doesn't defer to the constellations as we do.
Hmm.
And so you see, when you get into this, what I'm trying to explain is that the philosophy of astrologies can be drawn on a piece of paper by the division of a circle. And when you understand that, then you understand astrology. And until then, you do not understand it. And astronomy of astrology, which is kind of the science, is valid because you're looking at our perception of the sky, but it only becomes astrology when you map it, only when it puts on a map. Then the map is known as a mandala.
Yeah.
Okay, a mandala. And it's the planets now are no longer what they are in the cosmos, in the solar system. They're now symbols, symbols. And the symbol of the sun and the moon and Venus and Mercury and Mars and Jupiter and Saturn and Uranus, Neptune and Pluto have a great depth of meaning associated with archetypes. So I just want to kind of clarify that astrology is founded in sacred geometry and not in astronomy. This is a very interesting and important point because there's a lot of confusion out there, and there's this notion of the real sky. So there's always people that want to create a movement of truth, which is not wrong, but it's kind of there's this notion of fundamentalism in it.
Hmm.
What that means is that only Christians know the truth, or only
Right.
Muslims know the truth, or only, yeah, yeah. That's a part of the human condition. So it becomes can only be one, which is a very impoverished consciousness. It's like saying there's only one God versus God is one.
Right.
Suddenly now there's inclusivity and unity and allowance and all of the above, but when there can only be one, which is the mind's narrowing tendency to divide. See, the ego mind is oriented to divide, sort, categorize, and differentiate.
Hmm.
So in every field, there's various players that are very ego driven and they're looking for the one.
Right.
They want to like whether you call it a singularity, which is the opposite of holism. Holism says no, 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 no. The source is omnipresent. That means it's everywhere. You
Right.
can't go, here it is. It's kind
Right.
of you almost like going, you want to say to them, I'm sorry, you're kind of still in elementary school thinking about it. You're missing the point. So
Hmm.
that there's this big thing about singularity in science. It's kind of like, no, it's omnipresent.
Hmm.
Even like not long ago, historically, they said there's this many galaxies in the universe. And they've come to a point they go, we have no idea. Because the further our advanced telescopes look, what used to be two, billion or something, what used to be a finite number is now forgotten.
Yeah.
But in the game of power, there's various forces that don't want people to know that.
Hmm.
It's like that. It's dark, it's kind of like a dark and light force and the ambition, control. So if you can control people's perceptions
Yes.
and their thinking, well, quite frankly, fundamentally, they're buying what you're selling.
Hmm.
So it goes on like that.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so incredible. I've seen so much of that, and it's just I love the quote that in any given moment there are infinite possibilities, because that's kind of how I look at the world. Like, is it, how is it not possible when everything is possible? It's just, it's so fascinating to me to play in all the possibilities. And I highly encourage people to do that. Just like I said to a gentleman yesterday, I'm like, you don't even actually have to do it. just allow yourself to play in the possibility of it for a little while and see where that takes you, see how it makes you feel, you know?
There is another side to that that I would like to offer, though, but that simultaneously, when you talk about possibilities, yes, the universe is definitely woven for possibility, but it also operates on purpose, which represents probability.
Mm,
Probability. Possibility without probability is kind of missing. It's kind of a bit of wishful thinking at worst.
mhm,
So yeah, like probability kind of goes into a more sober, grounded perspective of realism regarding who you are, why you're here, and how you can manage your time better to align yourself with that. But if you get only open to possibilities, it kind of, which is not, it's a bit paradoxical because on one hand, it is a good idea, but it becomes a little bit without purpose. It's funny to say that because
no, I get it.
destiny implies that it's like you didn't go to, like, it's like going to university, okay, say, and you're there. There's so many possible classes I can go to, right?
Yeah,
But you're not going to get your degree with that thinking. I
right.
could go to this class, that class, or the other class, or I can go downtown. Or you see, so it goes, no, 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 no. Why are you here? Why? Okay. So then, but do, like, but what people in their fear want to do is you should be here the way I should be here. That is the problem.
Right.
Is
Do you
when
feel
they
like the
impose the why.
Yes, and I agree with you. I think that's great. And it actually like I'm gonna go back and listen to this episode myself for my own benefit multiple times because you've put out
Yeah.
some really great information. But do you feel like for people who maybe aren't quite ready to commit to that purpose, maybe they're not even sure what their purpose is, do you feel like just kind of playing in the possibilities is a good place for them to start, like opening up to something more?
Opening opening your mind to higher realities is the way I would describe it. Opening your mind to higher reality is a little bit different than possibilities, but the universe is infinitely complex. So opening our mind is a slightly different phrase than we have access to infinite possibilities.
Mhm.
See, it's, I do appreciate that some people are born to push the boundaries. And that I do appreciate. Like, for example, there's this sport of people jumping off cliffs with this suit on that turns into like a flying squirrel and they fly,
Yes.
right? Which is quite exciting. They're pushing the boundary of possibility,
Mhm.
which is its own contribution at best to challenge notions of what's probability is not the same as saying impossibility. Okay, probability, impossibility is way over here. Probabilities in the middle, possibilities kind of okay. So it's kind of gets into a certain amount of physics, interestingly. But basically, well, you see, quite frankly, astrology can be a very awakening experience. People tend to think of astrology as a fortune telling, making predictions. Some
Mhm.
astrologers do work that way only, sort of assuming that the person knows who they are. I'm what's called a humanistic astrologer, so I'm very person-centered. I'm like, who are you? Where do you come from? Where are you at? Why are you here? Now, my job is not to tell them in absolute no uncertain terms, but to awaken and inspire them to consider. And usually in that kind of reading, when they get it, when I begin with who you are, where you're coming from, I'm kind of playing back to them what the chart shows me, and they're like, "That's like the times that pretty much almost every new client they say you're hitting it on the nailing it on the head." Now, people can hear what sounds true, but it's not. So it's a little tricky, but the point is that astrology can bring that awareness to people for sure.
Mhm.
Okay. It can be a very awakening, inspiring, affirming, which is the first place to start. And then later in time, you can be a little bit more predictive, but you got to start with who are you? Why are you? What are you, what are you born to do on a personal evolutionary level? What are your strengths? What are your challenges? All that kind of thinking. All right. So it's a very powerful tool to support that. Um, Now, the average person who kind of is, quite frankly, if the average person's peaceful and happy and healthy, okay, there's not much to do or say. Like, okay, leave them alone. They're right. They're happy, healthy, and peaceful. Pain, pain will be what will drive them to know, to be sincere.
Yeah.
So it's a little bit of a mind your own business thing that can occur. But there are people in the world, of course, who are out there inspiring the masses in all kinds of ways from what you do, right? You're inspiring people to consider new realizations without having to join, like, they don't have to strictly like join your congregation if you like.
Right.
They show up, or which is part of our times, right? It's quite great. So
Yeah.
you're doing it. And but I think I'm answering your question that it comes down to when the person, there's a saying, of course, we said it before, there's two sides of the saying, but it goes like this: when the student's ready, the teacher appears, which is kind of a nice way of saying it. There's
Mhm.
another saying is when the student is ready, the teacher disappears.
Yes.
That means that they're ready to graduate from what they have been focused on.
Hmm.
Okay. So there could be all the most wonderful knowledge in the world, high, very refined wisdom and knowledge to be gained. But if it's not their dharma, if it's not their purpose to learn that, they'd be better off playing in the sandbox practically if it made them peaceful and happy. It's funny to say that, but it's like there's no should in it. And it's kind of a every person on their own ground thing.
Yeah.
Every person kind of is, yeah. So we at a core level, they have this destiny dharma, but they could be in a phase of their life where they need to be more in retreat,
Mm.
or the opposite. They're more in driving determination. So yeah, it goes in. It's a very It's kind of when you say the many possibilities. That's where it's kind of another way of saying it is there's a lot of relativity on the game board.
Mm.
Like okay, a lot of people are doing different things, and it's all relative to like it's in other words, it all has relative value.
Mhm.
Relative that so it's another way of describing possibilities. So that's again where we bump into the word as
Yeah.
being a little words being
Jarring. I do love the open your mind to higher realities. I love that phraseology. That's really cool.
nice. I think that's what you mean by possibilities. I think if I may, I think what you're saying is there's there's much more to know. There's so
Yes.
much to learn. There's so many new possibilities of perception and interpretation.
Yes.
Okay, there's so many. Yeah, so that's another way of elaborating upon, and I think that's what you mean by possibilities. You're saying open your mind to that there's many other possible modes of perception and interpretation. That's
Yes.
probably what you're saying.
It is.
Just to,
Absolutely.
yeah, yeah, it carries it a little bit further into a little bit more elaboration, but in doing that, I think you become more grounded with it.
Hmm.
You see that the word possibilities, which seems a little too open-ended at worst, suddenly what it means is there's other modes of perception. Those key two words, perception and interpretation.
Hmm.
Okay, people like perception and interpretation, if you're evolving, is always changing a little bit.
Yes.
If you're not evolving, it stays fixed. And
Hmm.
that's okay too. Some people are in the very, very slow lane. I don't mean I don't mean to put them down when I say that.
Right.
Let's say there's an 8 lane highway, right? And then there's somebody on the sidewalk walking, sort of thing, right?
Yes.
Just to say a metaphorical, the person walking is have every good reason and right to do that. That might be exactly where they need to be. They're
Hmm.
not for all kinds of reasons. And then the next person, even yet, you can kind of almost like an image screen, you find them, they're way out in the country enjoying living off grid, right? And they don't go anywhere. They stay
Right.
there. They stay there. They stay. Okay, right. So they could be very like evolving, of course, by that experience. So that's where, yeah, this is, I think, an elaboration once again on possibilities. But people instinct wants others to be like them, and that's called fear. That's what they're doing. They're driven by fear. Instinct and fear means they're egocentric, by the way. So, in other words, spirituality can be understood as the process of becoming soul centered. And it
Mhm.
goes back to what you said and what we talked about initially. The mind of the soul, the deep subconscious, is in the at the risk of sounding like a contradiction, sitting under the Bodhi tree to become enlightened so you can transcend that mortal coil is it's like a radical notion. But becoming progressively a little bit more enlightened is not the same statement, and that is good. So
Right.
it's like a dimmer switch, very, very, very incremental dimmer switch, where it's going up a little brighter, and even if it only goes up, marginally in this whole life, if it went up at all, that's good. That's good,
Right.
you know, because it went. But people, it's been said there's only like yin and yang, pleasure and pain, up and down, him and her, etc. Um, the polarities of duality. Um, Sorry, I missed my thought there. Sorry, I kind of lost my thought on that one.
Fine.
I shouldn't have elaborated so much. It made me think of something, that him and her thing, which is kind of out there being challenged, right? Yeah, what it really comes down to is that we are wise. It all comes down to, this is what I want to say. I remember love and fear. So
Yeah.
when you say possibilities, what you're saying is love.
Yeah.
That's what you're
Love.
saying.
Yeah.
I'd like to offer you that. You're saying love. Love means don't be afraid. There's other perceptions, there's other interpretations, and just kind of get into loving the possibilities
Yeah.
of new. But fear is gridlocked and white knuckled to certain perceptions and interpretations, and woven within that perception and interpretation is, by the way, belief and self-concept.
Hmm.
So their belief, self-concept of who and what they are and what life is, that's what you're here to challenge. I believe in an interpretive statement for you. That's what you're doing. You're getting out of you're endeavoring in an inspirational way to help people break free from the instinct-driven gridlock of belief and self-concept, which is driving, anchoring their perception interpretation in a very fixed and conclusive way.
Mhm.
So they're not open and they're not evolving. They're kind of caught.
Mhm.
And in an indirect way, maybe at a subconscious level, that will likely produce pain.
Mhm.
Now, people might kind of be very drawn to a certain religion, like Christianity, Jesus, for example, and they just kind of get together with others and they give their heart and soul to Jesus. Well, I don't want to say that's a wrong or bad thing. I don't,
Right.
because if they're happy and if they're happy and healthy and peaceful, then good. The only problem would be if they start telling you that you should also come to church. So the word should
Yeah.
gets underscored, should. And then what they're doing then is projecting their fear
Mhm.
as opposed to what you're doing, which is exercising love by trying to get them to break free of that rigid notion, which is now somewhat aggressively sometimes projected onto others that they are either going to hell. So their interpretation perception has become very narrow and rigid, and they're no longer in God is one. They're now into there's only one God and it's our God. So
Mhm.
it becomes like a child
Yes.
that's saying, there's only room for us in this schoolyard. And so they don't realize they become very passive aggressive, like bullies.
Mm.
Like, how dare you? Like a very kind of pride and arrogance starts to emerge.
Yeah.
You see, and I think, and then so round coming round circle, you're invested in love
Yes.
with your emphasis on possibilities. And I'm just offering a little elaboration so that purposeful probability gets involved.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because it goes back to like what I said, it goes back to what I said about the house. And in like you can get the soul parts, but okay, now that you got the soul parts, what are you going to do now?
Mhm.
Okay, it's not finished. That's just the beginning. That's
Yes.
like getting now that you got your shit together, what are you going to do about this? So if all the person's doing in this life is getting their shit together, that's okay.
Yes.
That's great because that's valuable, right? Good for
Very.
you. You're becoming more centered, integrated, balanced, etc. So if that's all you achieved, it's okay. That was worth it.
Yeah.
Okay, right. So
Absolutely.
I don't want to overemphasize that there's any should what they but still invariably in the deeper sense of the soul, there comes a time when they need to that where by destiny will guide them to take that higher level of integration and exercise it through the field of experience in life, of which there are many possibilities,
Mhm.
and thereby through the experiential process, they're engaged in a learning, integrating, evolving process. And that's the problem with religions when they get too dogmatic, they block that.
Oh, yes. It's so true.
At worst, at worst.
I was raised Pentecostal, and I've stated that before in previous podcasts, but one of the things that was so incredible to me when I was growing up was, and even into adulthood, was watching the different churches that my parents attended with us kids and how different rules applied in each church. Like, you have to wear your sleeves down to your wrists in one church. You couldn't wear open-toed shoes if you were, in another church. It was just all these weird little things. And then how
Yeah.
each one of those churches inside the same religion thought they were the ones who were doing it the right way. the true way, and it
Yeah.
just, I mean, it just was amazing to me that it could exist in the same religion. I mean, it's more understandable from one religion to another, but when it exists in the same religion and there's all this distension in the ranks, I guess would be a good way to put it, it just didn't make sense to me. And that's why, when I got to be an adult and started, and when I first started on my spiritual journey, I was terrified because I thought I was going to, just spontaneously combust into a ball of fiery brimstone because that's what I was taught to believe, Well, here I
Right.
sit, so that's
Yeah.
not true. But it's pretty incredible how it can keep you down and keep you from exploring those other perceptions and those other beautiful realities that are there.
For example, yes. And that's what I meant by power and control. They want to control how you wear your clothing and how you do this. And usually, of course, there's somebody at the helm, often, some sort of leader. And when you get close to them, you will bump into a whole bunch of hypocrisy, a whole bunch of um, unintegrated and fear-based often. Okay, so yeah, it's like the human condition is like that, and there's a lot of that out there for sure. And when it comes back to our purpose, we kind of do need to realize that in this school of life, and again, linked to possibilities, there are many, many things going on that we may wish to be able to change. Like, in other words, we wish we could help it. We wish we could improve it, wish we could liberate it
Yeah.
or them.
Yes.
But it does come down to sort of a pick your battles thing, or a great phrase is to know the difference between your sphere of influence versus your sphere of concern. Your sphere of concern could be global. You
Yes.
care about everything and everybody, but your sphere of influence can't attend to that because there's only so much time and energy that you have. So the more you focus on your sphere of influence to address your spheres of concern, the more realistic you become. You become more able. So you could say, you want to save the whales, but I don't have much time to do that. It's not my call, if you like.
Right.
But you could give a little donation to those doing it, or you can
Right.
at least give them a thumbs up if you like in this day and age. You could give them a little cheer, you could, be a little hurrah. It could be a donation, but yeah, you're wiser to get back to your sphere of influence,
Mhm.
which will produce a certain kind of limitation to, what you're doing. So
Mhm.
that's why it gets become increasingly focused. How do you stay very focused on your sphere of influence without becoming narrow-minded? That's a kind of an interesting question, but basically, it's always nice way to summarize it. It's either you're operating from love, which is inclusivity,
Yes.
or fear, which is exclusivity. So, right, fear excludes because the ego mind divides, sorts, categorizes, and differentiates. And it wants to, in its instinct, it wants to survive. So it wants to feel superior. And it goes on and on like that again and again and again. It won't end anytime soon, by the way. Don't hold your breath that we're going to have all these problems all solved, in a number of decades. The drama will continue because the game board, the school of life, is meant to be a drama. It's
Mhm.
not meant to be an absolute hellfire, everybody dies drama, but it's invariably a drama because different levels of perception and so forth, belief, perception, self-concept, interpretation, are invariably on the game board vying for power. And if we lived in a truly enlightened world, we would all be very busy empowering each other,
Yes.
but we do not live in that world. And there's a lot of forces busy controlling everybody.
Mhm.
And that's what's going on. Little religions, the news,
Mhm.
like this news station versus that news station is delivering very different news. So I have a saying, what do you think the news is? You know, it's kind of like a sports team mentality,
Yeah.
or I like baseball, not football. It's kind of like so, and people there's another little riddle of perception I'd like to add to all of this. It's kind of a fun one. It goes like this. It goes in the direction of your possibilities thinking. When you realize you don't see reality as it is, then you see reality as it is. See
That's going to
that?
blow some minds right there.
That's a good one. Everybody should take that one. When you realize you don't see reality as it is, then you begin to see reality as it is. You become more open,
Yeah.
inclusive, communicative. You start to realize that that person right there, right next door to you, in the room, all over the place, are perceiving and interpreting it differently than
Yeah.
you. And there's no debate, there's no argument. All there is, oh, okay, you see it that way, cool. Or, then you go into love, inclusivity, as opposed to fear, exclusivity.
Yeah.
So it goes.
Yeah. And
But
this,
people think they see that yeah, they think they see reality as it is. It's very ironic.
yeah. And this is a really important year, I feel, to get out the message that you just said, because there's a lot of that. I'm not going to get into it because I don't want to go that direction with this conversation, but this is a really important year for us to be focused on love and inclusivity and knowing that we're all allowed to have our different perspectives. So I'll just leave it at
I
that.
think it's always it's I would agree with you. We're coming around astrologically speaking, by the way, T, we're coming around a fairly what could be called pivotal corner. Like there's with humanity. I mean, we look back, we can go back to the millennial turn, right? 2000. Then there was 911. That was a big turn. Then there was the economic crash of 2007, 8. That was a big turn. Then there was Obama, for example, in the United States, which, broke the old code. So these were all turns,
Right.
right? And then there's these wars. There's all these terms, but and astrologically, we've looked at these over the years, and most people aren't paying attention to the astrologers. They're not getting the press, but the astrologers will predict these things
Mhm.
to a fairly high degree of likelihood, and they're right. So we like the basic prediction is that we're coming into some very powerful new beginnings that already are underway. We're already the you could say the stove is on. In terms of the current reality, you could say that the stove got turned on in about 2023. Now, admittedly, we could go back to 2019 and COVID, right?
Mhm.
2019, 2020, everybody knows that was big. But
Right.
in terms of and that was definitely big and very pivotal, and we're still dealing with the repercussions of that.
Right.
But more specifically astrologically, yeah, the next couple 2 to 3 years, uh, two really, more than three even, but 2 to 3 years, it's quite big. It's like a lot of new beginnings that it's kind of a little bit of fasten your seatbelts in a positive sort of sense.
Yeah.
So yeah. So I think I'm just agreeing with you, but I just want to tie in astrologically. There's a several far planets entering new signs, and when that happens, when they enter new signs, this is true of Western astrology. There's a kind of a what's called what Western astrology is called tropical zodiac. It's based on the sunlight and the seasonal round, which is always, just like this time of year, it's always kind of generally consistently like this.
Right.
And it doesn't dismiss the constellations, but it's not anchored into the constellations, which kind of are in an ironic, kind of strange place. But anyway, it's quite evident when the planets enter new signs and what happens, and we will have proof positive of that in the bigger picture over the next 2 years, admittedly. I don't want to make it sound like it's just going to be like hell and brimstone, and fire, like you said. No, I don't want to, but it's it's going to be a time of uh, rather pivotal time. So yeah, it goes back to what you're saying. And don't, if I may, I might encourage you, don't get too attached. Don't get too attached to how much, but I appreciate enjoying your work, and it's good work by inspiring people to open their minds, right? So you're kind of bringing them love and light, is what I
Yes,
might interpret it as, what you do, right?
absolutely.
Which is another way of uh, elaborating upon that possibilities word. But it's the human condition is larger than any individual or group's influence, you might say.
Hmm.
It's a little bit of a long conversation. What I'm trying to say is a bit of a long conversation. It's a little bit difficult to explain quickly. What I mean by that is the planetary positions produce synchronicities on the okay, like the planets in the solar system, and specifically the planets, by the way, in the solar system, that manifests as synchronicities here on Earth, but it's always happening and it always has been happening. So it's kind of a continuum process. But we do come to these places where there's these junctures, and we're in one, it's actually happening, as you can imagine. I mean, even as you go back and as an astrologer, you're beginning to realize, well, there was this juncture, then that juncture, but and everybody kind of knows that things are changing, but it's not easy to identify it in a clear way, like all the time, because there's so much going on, right?
Right.
So that's why I say it's a longer conversation, and I'm getting myself already in trouble by going there,
I'll have to have you
but
back.
you're right.
We'll do a part two. That would
Yeah,
be
yeah, let's do it.
that would be
Maybe we can
awesome.
get closer. Yeah, yeah, you bet.
Yeah,
Let's do that.
because
So, getting like, yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
I was just going to say, because I feel like you put out this like giant teaser about what's going to happen in the next 2 to 3 years, but you didn't kind of focus in
Well,
on
let's put
it.
it this way. It's very evidently we're moving into the like next major stage of the artificial intelligence.
Mhm.
It's the internet was the beginning, and the internet was like in 1993, about when there was a triple conjunction of what's called Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune. That they together they simultaneously disintegrated the old world and gave rise to the new world, which is on the high side positive.
Mhm.
Okay, the global village that has produced, right? And it gave rise to all the people having the opportunity to share their views, just like what you're doing right now. If it
Yes.
wasn't for the internet, okay. So there's a high side to it. So, but the dangers, of course, are what's called artificial intelligence, and transhumanism is the concern of some, which
Yes.
means there are some who have notions that humanity is plagued with itself and we need to improve it by changing us into more like Borg, is the kind of like mechanical.
Yes.
And it's a little bit of a radical concern, but more basically, what we're talking about is AI
Mhm.
and robotics,
Yeah.
right? Those are the things that have risen to be the concern, because you see, it's like that's what, if you people who watch the movies, everything from The Matrix to Judgment Day with or Arnold Schwarzenegger, and other movies that show dystopian futures based on the fact that robotics and artificial intelligence took over,
Yeah.
that is, and the astrology of our time right now is pointing right at it.
Wow.
And okay, yeah, yeah. And so we're what it's going to do though is like in the bigger picture of the next 20 years, what probably is going to happen is that we're going to move from nationalism to kind of a global village. Like in other words, maybe perhaps by necessity, globalism is here. So what globalism means is it's no longer national pride. Like I'm an American, I'm a Canadian. It's sort of on the high side. It says, look, you're all people. Let's just dissolve those borders, but they won't do that right away, of course. It
Right.
still helps to control the game board, right?
Right.
But just by look at what's happening like in the southern United States border, it kind of there's a lot of immigration coming through, like it's been flooding through for a number of years,
Mhm.
right? And it's just I don't think not the news doesn't always report that,
Right.
but it's kind of like there's a ton of illegal immigration, if I understand. But on the other hand, in a way, it's symbolic of and the world is undergoing mass migrations. It's those who study migrations, demographics, they would probably say, wow, yeah, and we see it. I mean, in the United States and various, and certainly Canada, we have more cosmopolitan cities. And but not as true everywhere in the world. They're less cosmopolitan. But what's happening is it's changing, and that's part of it. So, long and short, there's reason to say that at least strides will be taken to achieve a kind of a global village thing, which will increase a collective authority and decrease national.
Yeah. Interesting. That's so interesting. Yeah,
That's
we're
what
gonna have to do a
that's
part
what
two so that we can get into this a little
yeah,
more because I feel myself having all these questions bubbling up and we've already been talking an hour and a half. So I'm like, we're definitely
yeah,
gonna
yeah, yeah. We
do
could
another
sure
episode,
you
bring you
Well,
back.
that's just a nice, you bet that's a nice place to leave it in a way. It's not, it's just there's every good indication that, yeah, it will be like that. And I must admit, I don't think the birthing of that will be easy for everybody.
Yeah.
And so your inspiration to be open to the possibilities is a good one coming full circle for that on the basis of those who resist that change in a very black and white way will probably suffer more.
Yeah.
And
Absolutely.
those who are willing to embrace the revolution of evolution on the human condition, like a kind of global village, probably will do better because they'll be a little bit more cooperative.
Mhm.
See, and I'll sorry, some final words. It really does come down to nuclear power. Like terms of power on the planet. In terms of power on the planet, it comes down to the fact that we have nuclear bombs. That's we've all been born with that, right?
Yeah. Right.
So it's yeah, it's not new. It goes back to the 50s even, right? The Cold War,
Right.
etc. So they started merging and we goes on and on. Like they even dropped nuclear bombs, of course, in World War II. So that's how far back it was. That was a pivotal turning point.
Yes.
So the point is that not like it's not I like nationalism to an extent, right? But I'm a humanist first,
Right.
as opposed to a humanist, like all people want love and life.
Yes.
All right. So if our nationalism denies them of that, see, this gets tricky, gets political, gets economic. But but it's sort of where humanity seems to need to transcend, like to move beyond national power to global power. Okay. And I wouldn't say that if it wasn't for nuclear power, bombs.
Yeah,
That okay, because as the old saying goes, it only really takes one nuclear war to. So that's sort of always there for me. That it makes me think this way. That well, it seems like a sort of what I might describe like a globalist centralized power as kind of a necessary evil and I'm a little concerned about how they might behave, which could probably manifest as a massive global wide surveillance. See, that's what goes on in China, right? Like it's highly surveilled,
right.
and
Yeah,
then you have credit score, then you have credit score.
yes.
This is
Which
where it
just
gets a
isn't
little
about
scary.
money anymore. It's about your like as a human, just as a human. It's crazy.
It's about your compliance. It's
Yeah,
about like censoring your choices and actions with leverage. So what will, what's woven into that is no longer having cash.
yeah,
Now, these are not things I strictly want. These are not, etc. But it's hard to know. But it looks like because of AI, they have the power to do this, and that's where I think it's moving quickly. And the next 2 years stands to have a very significant advancement. That's when you say what you say, I think giving it a little bit more possible reality in terms of events use, right? So yeah, I'm sure your soul is calling you to this work to do what you can to help people loosen the grip of their narrow, rigid, fear-based thinking
yeah,
so that they can be more. And I think the key word that I might leave you with in my interpretation of you is another word that associates with possibilities is, well, we could say open your mind, but another key word is flexibility.
yeah. I have a term that I use sometimes when I'm talking to specific people that I associate with here in my personal life. And that is that people are so very committed to their misery. And I feel like that comes, and I don't say that as a very, like uh in a condescending way, because I don't feel like most people even realize that that's a thing. And I also feel like if they would open their minds to alternate realities, possibilities, perceptions, that it would really help ease the transition for some of these things that are coming. And maybe that's why I feel,
Exactly. I do appreciate that. I would say that is very, very likely what's going on, and that's why you're doing what you're doing. You're not doing it willy-nilly. You're doing it on purpose because you're in alignment. Yeah. So there we go, huh? And oh, that makes you teary a bit, huh? Hmm. Well, uh yeah, it's just that there's this wonderful that phrase, there's no problems in the moment. And so like gratitude for life, the attitude of gratitude is known as a heart chakra opener, literally like a
yes,
science. And then what happens is and so it's kind of a practice that we can all do. The more we find reason and opportunity to exercise gratitude all day long, like, right? Okay, the more present we are, the more we're noticing the birds, hearing them, seeing the flowers, we're more like present. So
yes,
take, we don't take time for granted
right.
and we don't charge into survival reactions.
Yeah. It's a huge differentiation there for sure. So I
Yeah,
definitely
yeah.
want to have you back, Michael. I feel like an episode 2 is like not even optional at this point because I feel like we have so many things to discuss further. So I do appreciate you coming on as my guest today and
Yeah.
sharing all of this amazing information, these different insights and perspectives, and inviting people to open their minds more and embrace some of these different realities and perceptions and possibilities, or whatever word they want to use that makes them feel good right there. So I really
You're
do.
welcome, and thank you. Thank you as well, Dee. Thank you. I look forward to it. Yeah, we can do
Yes,
more and elaborate in ways perhaps some of your listeners could bring questions forward, and we can you can look at see if there's any of those, for example, and we can elaborate a bit. But good, yes, it's been fun, and
yeah,
it's been great to share some time with you, and hopefully some of those insights will be helpful for yourself and your listeners. So,
absolutely. Absolutely. Well, I always invite my guests to share where they can be found on social media, website, whatever. So in case someone would love to work with you.
yes, Sunstar Astrology is my business name, just like that. Sunstar, one word, astrology.com. And you'll find me on Facebook as well. My website has articles and some free stuff in there, articles and videos too, by the way, so if people want that. And also I do a weekly horoscope, by the way. I've done it for like over 30 years,
Nice.
every week. Yeah. So that it just really speaks to people and they like it a lot. So it's free. There's a paid version, but there's a free version. So if anybody's interested, they can again go to my website and just look under horoscopes and sign up for free, and then they'll get them every week. And I there's when it comes to horoscopes, that you can basically read your sun sign, but there's actually one or two other signs you can read, and it creates a little layered reading. So I actually invite people who are new to ask me what other ones they would read. So then they get this little rich opportunity. But yeah, I've been writing that horoscope for over 3 decades
That's
every week.
that's
Yeah,
amazing.
that long, right? Yeah, that long. Because I'm dedicated to it with the realization that despite the fact that people kind of poo-poo them, they work, and how they work and why they work, I know how and why. I have studied it. So I can be and I'm not saying mine is the only one, but with a simple little old horoscope, believe it or not, people are like, holy, this like that this is really speaking to me. So check it out yourself.
Yeah.
I'll send you a link, but again, yeah, just go to my website, sunstarastrology.com, and that basically will be enough for people to find me.
Yes, perfect. That's awesome. Thank you again so much. And I know
Okay.
people will find you
Okay,
there.
you're
I'll drop
welcome.
your links in the description box below the video here. And
Wonderful. Okay.
thank you, everyone, for showing up for this beautiful episode of Spiritually Speaking. I invite you also to join the Spiritually Speaking Facebook group. The link for that is always in the description box below any of my videos. Um, And please like, share, and subscribe if you have enjoyed this content today. And I look forward to seeing you on the next one. And as always, I love you all.
Thank you, Dee.
You're very welcome.